Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, gentle breath in. And exhale softly like a breeze passing through the trees. Feel the weight of your day start to loosen. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing to hold, nothing to carry. Just this moment, soft and quiet, just for you. Let your shoulders fall naturally, letting go of the tension they've held all day. Feel that release move down your arms. Through your elbows, your forearms, and finally to the tips of your fingers. As if every exhale carries the day's weight away from you. Your hands rest easily, open and relaxed. Notice your face. Unclench your jaw and let your tongue rest softly in your mouth. The muscles around your eyes grow soft and heavy. Your forehead smooths as if a warm hand is gently brushing across it. Even the small muscles in your cheeks and temples are melting into stillness. Bring your attention to your breath again. Feel the natural rise of your chest as you inhale, and the gentle fall as you exhale. Your breath moves like soft waves along the shore. Slow, steady, and endlessly soothing. With each breath, your body sinks deeper into comfort. Your spine is supported. Your back feels safe and at rest. The bed beneath you carries all of your weight for you. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. Bring awareness to your hips and legs. Feel your thighs release, your knees softening. Your calves are warm and heavy. Even your feet, all the way to your toes, are loosening and letting go. From head to toe, a calm heaviness spreads through your body. Imagine a soft golden light above your head. It is warm but gentle, like the first rays of morning sunlight. This light begins to pour slowly over the crown of your head. It moves down, easing your scalp and forehead. It drifts across your closed eyelids and softens your cheeks. Your whole face glows in calm warmth. The light travels to your neck and shoulders. Releasing the last bits of tension. Down through your arms, into your hands and fingers. Every muscle it touches becomes light and free. Take a long, easy inhale. And exhale slowly. Feel how your body responds, sinking even deeper into rest. The golden light moves over your chest, across your heart, bringing peace, warmth, and safety. It spreads to your belly, softening and easing. Then into your hips and down your thighs, over your knees and calves, until it reaches your feet and toes. Your whole body now glows in comfort. A soft cocoon of light holding you safely. With every breath, you feel lighter, calmer, and more at ease. Now imagine yourself outside under a quiet twilight sky. The grass beneath you is cool and soft. A gentle night breeze brushes against your skin. The world is calm, and the air smells like fresh earth and wildflowers. Look up at the sky above. The first stars are twinkling, scattered like tiny lanterns. Each one appearing slowly as if to greet you. The deeper the night becomes, the more stars appear. A quiet, sparkling sea above you. Somewhere in the distance, a stream trickles softly. Its sound is like a gentle lullaby. Crickets sing their nighttime song, steady and soothing. Every sound is part of nature's soft whisper, welcoming you to rest. You feel your thoughts becoming softer now, like clouds drifting across an endless night sky. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to hold them. Just let them float and dissolve into the dark, peaceful sky. Take another deep, slow breath. In and out. Let it carry away anything you don't need to hold tonight. With every exhale, you are lighter, calmer, and ready for sleep. Your body is heavy now, warm and supported. Your mind is soft, quiet, and free. You are wrapped in safety, cradled by the night, and gently rocking toward dreams. Feel this peacefulness expand through your whole being. There is nothing left to do, nothing to change. Only to drift slowly and sweetly into rest. Good night. Rest deeply and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. The first sound that found me in Thistleford wasn't the gulls crying toward the harbor or the kettle in my rented cottage sighing toward a boil. It was the ticking, 100 heartbeats behind a wooden door that seemed to hover out of the fog and choose me. I had gone walking because the morning air was a soft gray you could fold around your shoulders, and because the walls of the cottage had held me all night like a question. I didn't have an answer, not for the cottage or for the thistle-sprigged wallpaper that curled in the corners, not for the note from the landlord that said, "Welcome, Holly, the garden gate sticks," and especially not for the restless thrum I carried across counties to get here. Thistleford made a gentle promise in the rental listing: sea breezes, friendly neighbors, a decent bakery, solitude. And I had arrived believing solitude would hush me. Instead, the quiet had gotten loud. So I walked. The fog pressed low and friendly as a cat. The lane tucked between stone cottages, every windowsill staged with teacups and robust geraniums. There were steps leading down to the harbor where the tide breathed in its old, slow way, and steps leading up to a yellow door I'd already decided was probably the baker's. I turned past it and nearly missed the hand-painted sign because the fog had turned it soft. Eli's Clock Shop, Time Restored. There was nothing flashy about it. A plain wooden door set in a stone face, a bell cord like a slender vein. No window display, which I found even stranger in a village where everyone seemed to love showing their best face. The tartlets and bluebells and shining brass. But the door leaked that sound, the intimate patter I felt more than heard. Ticking, layered and patient, the sound of 100 tiny hammers tapping reassurance into the air. I put my hand to the door. The wood was warm as if it were a living chest. And because I had left my old life to learn to touch the world without asking permission from fear, I pulled the door open and stepped in. Oil and dust and old wood. That smell. It reminded me of my father's garage in late summer, his careful hands welded to the shape of a wrench, the radio mumbling about cricket scores while he tuned a stubborn engine back into being. But this was gentler even than that. A sweetness under the metal, like walnut shells and orange peel. The light came down from a glass roof into a room that must once have been a workshop for something more ordinary, boots or boat hulls. Now it housed time, clocks everywhere, clocks with faces big as dinner plates and faces small as medals. A congregation of pendulums swaying like seaweed, long, slow arcs. Bracket clocks that looked like they would wear elderly spectacles if they could. Carriage clocks with tidy brass knobs. A grandfather clock with a door like a long brown coat and a moon phase painted at the top. A pale, thoughtful face afloat in navy, and behind a high counter, with a magnifying loupe flipped up to bear one kind eye, stood a man in a soft cardigan the color of fog, sleeves pushed to the elbow. He had delicate hands with blunt knuckles, and the kind of stability in his posture I imagined only came from knowing where to stand for decades. He was lifting the back off a small round clock, and when he noticed me, he nodded as if we were old friends who preferred not to startle each other. "Good morning," he said. His voice had a sanded quality, not rough so much as gently worn. "The door sticks. You did well." "I've been practicing with stuck things," I said, and immediately blushed because I didn't mean to be so honest with a stranger. "Sorry, hello. I was walking and heard the—" I gestured. The sound was a body now, a silky chorus around us. "I heard them. Tickers," he said, smiling. "They like fog. It makes them feel they've been doing something important." I let the door fall shut and stood with both hands jammed in my wool coat pockets like a child not trusted not to touch. Yet everything in me wanted to touch, those pendulums especially, to feel the reprimand or forgiveness in their swing. The man flipped the loop back into place, then lifted it again, One motion, two, like a little wave. I'm Eli. You must be new. Holly, I said. Yes, 2 days. Welcome, Holly. He set the small clock on a leather square. If you'll sit, I'll put the kettle on. You can listen while I finish this little fellow. It's a fussy one. There was a wooden stool near his bench. My knees were grateful. I hadn't realized how far I'd wandered. The air in the shop lay kindly against my skin, and I sat down feeling the stool accept me. Eli went to the back, where I could hear water being run into a kettle and the click of a switch, then returned, taking the loop into his palm like a marble. What is it? I asked, nodding at the small clock. It had a plain silver face, numbers thin as thread, a single hairline crack at 7. A travel alarm from between the wars, he said. It's been outrunning itself. Some clocks do that when they're frightened. Clocks can be frightened? He tilted his head, the kind of look you give a question you didn't expect to be asked. My granddaughter says I'm anthropomorphizing, he said dryly. But don't you think some things carry our panic after we've left the room? A kettle knows when you've been impatient with it. A door that's slammed shut once has a different memory of closing. And clocks, well, clocks don't like being hurried. They'll tolerate it for a while, but they get out of sorts. I watched him unscrew a back plate. I couldn't stop looking at his hands. They were hands that took their time, that didn't apologize for moving slowly. Mine had been trained to speed, tap, tap, tap across keyboards, scroll, click, submit. In my old office, people praised me for my quickness, which to them meant usefulness. Lately, though, my hands had started dropping things. What brings you to us? Eli asked without looking up. Proof, I said before I could stop myself. He glanced at me then, a quick, keen look that seemed to adjust my focus like a lens. Of what? That I didn't ruin everything, I said. Or maybe that I did, just not the way it felt in the moment. I left my job. I sold most of my furniture because it felt heavy as guilt. I had an apartment that faced a brick wall and a manager who thought deadlines were an art form, and I couldn't sleep because there were always emails arriving like small, urgent birds tapping at the glass. I laughed weakly. I thought if I came somewhere none of my choices had been made, I might find some new ones. He nodded, as if I'd told him I needed a new spring for the carriage and a little oil under the dial. And a foggy morning seems as good a time as any to begin, I suppose. The kettle rattled its preliminary boast from the back. The shop smelled suddenly like steam and tea leaves as well as oil, a combination that felt wonderfully impossible. I tried to write a list of what I want here, I confessed. It looked like a grocery list for a person who doesn't know how to cook. Eggs, flour, something sweet. Something sweet helps, he said, and set the loose back carefully in a shallow dish. Look here." He slid the clock closer to me and pointed with a screwdriver, not touching. Inside, like a miniature city, tiny gears interlocked, bridges and teeth, a small coiled spring with a tension I could feel just looking at it. He reached for a pair of tweezers and moved the slightest piece. This whisper of a lever that, once nudged, made the whole architecture shiver. "It's never the showy bit," he said. "Not the big wheel or the large spring. It's often a small hesitation in a small place." "I know about those," I said. "The small hesitations, they breed." "They do," he said. "And no one else can hear them until suddenly the whole thing's shouting." He showed me the escapement, the heartbeat that rationed motion into equal increments. "It's the fairest part," he said. And maybe it was only the fog, but I felt my throat tighten. The fairest part. I had forgotten the possibility that fairness could exist in anything except charts and office policy handbooks. The kettle clicked finished, and Eli left me with the clock's open heart ticking, the sound like applause in a library. Alone with it, I thought of nights in my old bed when the radiator knocked on the wall, and I counted the seconds between knocks, believing if I could make the pattern even, I would stop the panic from blooming. Counting hadn't helped. Listening felt different. Listening admitted the possibility someone else was in charge and I could be held. When he returned, he set a mug wrapped in both his hands in front of me, as if it were a small animal to be introduced. "No milk?" he asked. I shook my head. He added a sugar cube anyway, and it wobbled like a boat before surrendering. "I charge 1 story per cup," he said cheerfully, "but I suppose you've told me enough for a teapot." I took a sip, and the warmth ran down my arms. "Do people bring you clocks from all over?" I asked, because I wanted to give him a story too. But mine felt raw in my mouth, and his had so many exteriors to choose from. "Or do you find them?" "Both," he said. "Sometimes they find me. There's a woman down on Elm with a French clock that makes a sound like a cricket. It's been chirping in disappointment for years. A trawler captain who brings me his barometer when he wants to feel the illusion of control. A lot of the village came with the flood 8 summers ago. Everything sodden, faces and hands and gears, when we learned what drying means." He smiled, not unkindly. "Here, everything is ordinary until it isn't." I looked up at the grandfather clock. Its pendulum swept slowly. "What's that one's story?" "Ah," Eli said softly, "the great-nephew of a man who never wound it. You can imagine the resentment." I told it sternly that neglect is too heavy a coin to carry forward. It's forgiven a little. Can clocks forgive? Some prefer to forget. A rare few remember everything and make themselves miserable with it. He lifted a small brush and coaxed dust from the tiny metal teeth. "The trick is setting them back to their own pace," You can't keep time for anyone else. I swallowed. I have tried. And how did it feel? Like I was always late and somehow always early, and either way always wrong. He nodded, as if confirming a suspicion about the weather. Yes, well. I took another sip, letting the tea speak to my ribs. How did you learn to do this? I asked. Fixing them. My father built boats, he said. He thought I'd follow him. I did for a fortnight, and then discovered the small of my back had opinions. I liked the quiet of the small work more than the argument of the big. I liked that a storm can't throw a bench across a room. A watchmaker took me on because I turned up every day with my hands clean and my eyes open. I kept turning up. The loop flashed, then rested on his forehead like a second eye that had gone to sleep. There's a glamour to boats. Clocks don't glitter. But I've always loved the democracy of seconds. You get as many as I do. We spend them differently, that's all. Sometimes mine feel like they're spending me, I said. The admission surprised me. Neater than anything I'd gotten on paper. They're not, he said gently. They're only counting. I set the mug down and pressed my thumb into the wood of the bench. There was a little groove where dozens of thumbs had rested before mine, a fingerprint worn permanent. Not alone, said the bench. May I ask you something else? I said. What do you do when you can't fix it? When a clock is past it? I tell them the truth, he said. I tell them we can keep the face and make a new engine, or we can keep the engine and accept a face too old for anyone to read at a glance, or we can stop pretending it's a clock and admit it's a memory. And then I help them decide who will keep the memory. Does anyone choose to throw it away? He considered. Less than you think. People are braver with memories than with time. The door opened then, with the same reluctant sound it had made for me, and a woman in a raincoat leaned in with a package the size of a bread loaf. Morning, Eli, she said. Morning, stranger. Her hair was the color of toast and tied back with a rubber band, and she had the harried serenity of someone who could find a plaster and a macaroon at a moment's notice. This is Holly, Eli said. She's just moved in. Holly, this is Minna. She knows all the gossip worth not repeating. Minna snorted, set the package down. The shop seemed to accept the weight of her arrival without complaint. My niece's music box, she said, stopped playing right about the time her dad left. Make of that what you will. I will make of it a new mainspring, Eli said, and a good story to tell myself while I work. Minna glanced at me, her eyes softening. You're in the little blue cottage on Oyster Lane, she said, not really a question. I blinked. Yes. You'll want to prop your window with a spoon when it's windy, she said. It tries to close itself when no one is looking. She tapped the package. Eli, put love in it. That's the only thing I stock in any quantity, he said. When she'd left, the door sighing shut, Eli watched it settle. Minna's sister died 5 years ago, he said quietly. The niece collects tiny bells. None of them ring quite right. I thought of the music box whose silence had aligned itself with the moment a father left the path. Do you ever feel like a priest? I asked. People bring you confessions wrapped in gears. Priests, if they are lucky, have God, he said. I have grease and threadlock and patience. We all get a different toolkit. The travel alarm gave a sharp, satisfied click, as if something in it had aligned with an internal truth. Eli's smile broke like weather brightening. There you are, he murmured. He set the back in place and tightened the tiny screws with a practiced tenderness that felt like blessing. Listen, we did. It ticked. Not louder than the others, not more beautiful, just right. My chest softened, as if something inside me had stopped flinching. May I? I asked, and when he nodded, I set my palm against the casing. The vibration trembled against the bones of my hand. A small pulse. Regular. I matched my breath to it. Inhale for 3 ticks, exhale for 6, and felt my lungs join the room's metronome. For the first time in months, my breath didn't end in a scramble. You look steadier, Eli said. The observation wasn't triumphal. It was the same voice you'd use to say the tide had turned or the kettle had boiled. It feels like everywhere else, time is a chase, I said. Here it's just happening. He wrapped the travel clock in a soft square of flannel and set it aside. That's the hope? I try not to advertise false miracles. Do you sell clocks or only repair them? Both? He gestured to a glass case I hadn't noticed, where 2 small mantel clocks sat like dignified pets. But not to everyone. I'm impudent enough to think clocks choose their homes. And what if I wanted one? I asked, realizing as the words left me that I did. Not a large statement piece clock, not a thing I'd brag about. Something that could keep my little cottage honest. Something that would listen if I listened. Eli looked at me the way you look at a clock you're considering attempting. A quick assessment, not of value, but of temperament. You'd want a quiet one, he said. Not silent. A clock's job isn't to disappear. He considered. Something with a soft face and steady bones. Something unafraid of fog. I'm unafraid of fog, I said, and we both knew I was testing out a braver sentence than the one that wanted to be there. You're learning to be, he corrected gently. That's better. He led me to a shelf where a small wall clock hung, its wooden case carved with the simplest possible curve, the grain like water under a moon. The hands were dark and slim. The pendulum was hidden, but I heard its restraint. a shy, sure swing in the body of the clock. "This one belonged to a school teacher," he said. "She retired when it began to gain minutes in the afternoon. She thought it was teasing her. In fact, it was trying to help. It believed the children wanted to go home." I laughed, unexpectedly fond of both clock and children. "What happened to the teacher?" "She moved to Wales to grow tomatoes." "Did she succeed?" "She sends me jars as a threat." I stood under the clock and felt its ticks drop into my crown like soft rain. My shoulders let go of a little, then a little more. "How much?" "For you?" His eyes warmed. "A promise and a fair price." "What's the promise?" "That you'll wind it." His voice gentled. "And that when you listen to it, you will listen to yourself at least as closely." My throat went hot. I nodded. "I can try." "You can do it." He spoke the line as if it were a small, serviceable truth. "Bring me your kitchen timer if it bites you." I paid, and he wrote something in a ledger with a fountain pen whose nib had a soft, steady line. He wrapped the clock in paper heavy enough to be a coat and tied it with string. The parcel sat in my arms like resolve. At the door, I paused. "Do you ever close?" I asked. "I mean more than at the end of the day." "I have been known to walk down to the harbor and scold the herons," he said. "Less often in fog. Fog brings the ones who need to find me." "I found you," I said. "You did," he agreed simply. "Now go home. Hang it where you can hear it and not resent it. When it ticks, think fair. When it ticks again, think enough. See where that takes you." Outside, the fog had thinned, as if someone had taken a gentle comb to it. The lane held the ordinary world up in its hands. The baker's yellow door, the iron bollards, the soft rattle of a bicycle bell far up the hill. I carried the clock like a loaf of bread, and for once my legs did not try to hurry without me. Back in the cottage, I set the clock on the mantel where the previous tenant had left a cluster of shells arranged by size, small to small. I took down 2. I made room. The nails were already there in the plaster, a little askew, proof of someone else's experiments with keeping things in their place. I hung it and stepped back. Tick, tick. Not the chase, not the clatter of a shoe on tile as you run late for a train you told yourself you would never miss again. A steady animal going about its work. I breathed. The room breathed with me. The wallpaper's thistles seemed less prickly. The window admitted a smudge of light. I unpacked slowly that afternoon because there was no prize for speed. I folded cardigans into drawers that smelled faintly of lavender and disuse. I found my father's screwdriver, the one with a worn green handle, and set it in the kitchen drawer next to the wooden spoons. I opened the window the way Minna had said and propped it with a soup spoon. The air that came in smelled like sea and something metallic and old rope. Somewhere in the village, bells began to speak the hour, and my clock did not contradict them or apologize for being different. It simply kept on, fair enough, fair enough. I wrote the words on a torn envelope and taped it inside the cupboard door. As evening came, Thistleford folded its edges closer. I walked again, less to escape and more to accompany myself. In the clock shop's window, no display, but the door now propped open with a wooden wedge, I saw Eli leaning over his bench, the loop in place, the light from the glass roof turning his hair into a low-growing cloud. He glanced up once and caught me looking. He lifted a hand, quick as the flick of a second's tail. I lifted mine back. "Thank you," I said aloud, though I was far enough away that only the fog would carry it. It did its best. Later, back at the cottage, I lay in bed listening. Not to the radiator, I didn't think the cottage had one, or to emails arriving like rain into a metal gutter, to the pendulum that I could not see but knew was there, making the room fair and enough. The tight place under my sternum loosened. Sleep came on its own feet, unhurried, as if it had finally caught up to a pace it could live with. Before I drifted, I decided something. Tomorrow I would go back with scones from the yellow door. I would ask Eli about the flood and about drying. I would bring him my travel adapter, which had never forgiven me for buying it in a hurry at an airport newsstand, and I would listen to it confess. I would ask him if he'd teach me to open a back without fear, and I would tell him about the minute I stood under his clocks and felt all the little hammers inside me put down their tools and rest. I woke once in the night to a silence so plush I almost didn't recognize it, and for a startled moment I thought the clock had stopped, that I had failed to keep the promise within hours of making it. I held my breath, and there it was, the small heartbeat in the room's chest. Tick. The kind of sound that doesn't insist, that simply is. I smiled in the dark like someone who'd found a friend in a new place and knew where to meet them tomorrow. A fog-bedded lane, a wooden door, a sign promising time restored, and a kindly man with patient hands. The morning would find me there. But for now, I lay under the thistle-sprigged wallpaper and let the pendulum say what it had been saying all along, only I hadn't listened. Fair. Enough. Fair. Enough. Until the words became something larger. Welcome home. The first time I saw someone cry over a spring the size of a thumbnail, I understood. This wasn't a shop. It was a small chapel with brass hymns and oil for incense, and the prayers were measured in seconds. I started visiting Eli's clock shop so often that the bell learned my hand. The fog thinned as summer wandered forward, but the ticking stayed cool, a river under the month's heat. I'd bring scones some mornings, the lemon icing gone shiny by the time I crossed the lane. Some afternoons I came empty-handed, as if showing up with all my emptiness was the honest offering. Eli always greeted me with that small, weather-checking smile that made me feel like a tide he'd grown fond of. "Holly," he'd say, as if my name were already embedded in the grain of his bench. "Sit. Today we're making peace with a quarrelsome minute hand." On the third visit, a woman in a navy dress arrived with a watch in her palm like it was a fledgling. The dress was the kind you wear when you're trying to be tidy for grief. She had composed hair and a mouth that kept remembering something and then forgetting it again, which I recognized as hope trying to behave. Eli set down the clock he was cleaning and took the watch with both hands, the way he takes tea. "Anniversary," she said, answering the question he hadn't asked. 30 years this June. He wore it until last winter, and then it stopped, after the hospice. She bit the inside of her lip, steadying herself from the inside out. I thought maybe it was rude of it to stop when he did, as if it couldn't bear to be in the world without him. Eli turned the watch over. "Some things stop because they've done the job they were asked to do, and the next job hasn't been named yet," he said. "May I open it?" She nodded, the smallest surrender. He set the watch on a leather pad and loosened the case back with a tool I'd learned to think of as a gentler kind of knife. I watched the woman watch him, how her fingers rubbed the thin chain like a rosary. "It could be," Eli murmured, peering through his loop, "that it only needs a little cleaning. Grief leaves a fine dust. It gets everywhere." The woman laughed, a bleat she seemed to surprise herself with. "Yes," she said, and covered her mouth with one hand. "Yes, it does." He cleaned, oiled, coaxed. The ticking came timidly, then like a bird testing air under its wings. When it steadied, the sound seemed to lay a hand against the woman's sternum. She closed her eyes. "That's him," she said, startled. "That is exactly him." She stood very still, as if any movement might spill a cup she'd just been handed. "I thought I couldn't bear hearing it again," she whispered. "But this is different." "It's his and yours now," Eli said. "Time changes ownership." She nodded, tears finally living where they wanted to live, and left with the watch in a small box the color of rain. After the door clicked shut, Eli put both palms flat on the bench. He always did that after someone left themselves on the counter. "Do you ever—" I began. "Yes," he said. He didn't make me finish. "Sometimes I close the box and set it on the shelf and go make tea and only then remember to breathe. I used to pretend I wasn't affected. Turns out pretending doesn't keep time any better than we do." A boy came another day with an hourglass that had a crack along its throat, the glass thinner there, as if someone had pinched time and it had squealed. He was about 10, with a t-shirt featuring a whale wearing sunglasses and a name I couldn't guess written in marker on the back. School Fair Detritus. He carried the hourglass like it was contraband. "What's this, then?" Eli asked, with a slanted smile reserved for boys and dogs. Granddad's, the boy said, proud and scared together. He said it was the only thing that told the truth even when he didn't want it to. Well done, Granddad, Eli said softly. What's your name? Bo. And the glass? It fell off the mantel. Bo's face tilted toward guilt. My sister and I, she was trying to teach me juggling with apples, and then he opened his hands to illustrate. It didn't break, it's just leaking. He was right. A fine ribbon of sand ran at the seam, a thin glitter of hours escaping wrong. Eli held it up to the light. We can't uncrack glass, he said, gentle but honest, but we can keep it from spilling more. How? By admitting the crack is there, Eli said. We seal it so you can see it, so you'll remember the lesson, but it won't keep emptying itself just to prove it's hurt. Bo nodded as if this made the kind of sense he'd hoped the world could make. While Eli worked with resin and patience, Bo fidgeted in my direction and landed his eyes on the small wall clock I'd bought. A twin to mine, waiting for its new owner. Do you work here? He asked me. Not exactly, I said. I listen here. Oh. He accepted that. Do you like it? Yes, I said, more fiercely than I meant. It's the first place I've liked in a long time. Bo looked at the hourglass, now wearing a thin, clear bandage. Granddad used to flip it and then turn the telly off, he said. He said we'd talk till the sand was gone. Sometimes it took ages. That was the best. When Eli handed the hourglass back, I watched the boy cradle it and understood, suddenly and completely, a thing I'd only guessed at before. You can sometimes mend a future by admitting the break in the past. The shop became a rhythm for me. Days I went, days I let myself miss it on purpose to prove there were other good rooms in Thistleford. But I always returned, drawn not just by the clocks, but by the way people entered carrying their stories with the same hesitation they carried a broken thing. Eli never rushed anyone. Tell me, he'd say, which was perhaps the kindest sentence I've heard. Sometimes the stories were small, a kitchen timer that chewed through batteries like a goat, brought by a woman who ran the bakery and had burned meringue twice that week and needed to blame a device. Sometimes they were heavy, a mantel clock that had belonged to a father who never said he was sorry, but had wound the clock every night at 9 with such care that his daughter learned to trust the sound instead of the man. A man who had never married and brought a cuckoo clock whose bird refused to come out except at noon, like me, he said and blushed. The more I sat on the stool near Eli's bench, the more I found myself wanting to stay when other people came, not to eavesdrop, but to bear witness to the quiet repairs being made. One afternoon I stood without asking and fetched the box of felt pads when Eli glanced toward the shelf. Another day, I rearranged a tray of tiny screwdrivers by size because it seemed to ease the room somehow. If he noticed, he didn't say until a week later, when he handed me a soft brush and pointed at a shelf of clocks I hadn't dared touch. "Dust settles fastest where stories land," he said. "Give them a kindness." I dusted. It felt like prayer in motion, the slow exhale as ancient varnish gave up a little of its dullness, the way a brushed surface looks suddenly attended to. I learned the difference between dust that arrives with the day and dust that comes from disuse. The powder grief leaves. The fluff of minute hands spun faster than they should have been. Eli would hum sometimes while I worked, a tune with no destination, and the clocks kept time for us both. "That one's from the flood," he'd say, nodding at a little Art Deco number with a face like a wry wink. "Spent 3 weeks in an oven with rice and stubbornness." "And this one?" I'd ask, pointing at a round-faced school clock with cigarette-colored numerals. "Grew up in a classroom where no one ever left on time," he'd say. "It developed ideas." I brought him my own clock on a Thursday afternoon that smelled like warm stones. It had been in a cardboard box under my bed for years, wrapped in the t-shirt I wore to sleep as a teenager, back when I thought time would always be this generous thing that let you retry and retry until you got the day right. I'd taken it from my mother's house years after the divorce, shortly after my father moved back to the coast and married a woman who called him darling the way my mother had used to say his name when she needed him to pass the salt. It was a simple alarm clock, pale green with a chipped corner and a face whose glass had been scratched by a clumsy cleaning. I'd loved it once. It used to sit on the dresser and tell me when the school bus would come and when to call my friend Mia and when to stop reading under the covers. It had stopped ticking the week my father moved out. Not immediately. It limped for a few days, as if trying to keep us from noticing, and then one night it sighed and became a round, quiet thing that knew the hour but refused to count it. I didn't tell Eli all of this when I set it on his bench. I said, "This was my clock." And then, because my throat tightened, I added, "It stopped." Eli looked up at me, not with pity, he's never used that, but with recognition, as if I'd turned up with a cousin to the clocks he already knew. He lifted it with care. "Some clocks wait until we're ready," he said. I had to sit. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath since I took it from under the bed. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said. "Readier than you were," he said. "You brought it." He opened the back. The inside smelled like a school gym closet, dust and mild embarrassment. He touched the hairspring, the balance, the little heart that had paused. "There are 2 kinds of stopping," he said lightly. "The kind that begs to be nudged, and the kind that has decided not to be bothered. We can try a nudge." He cleaned, he oiled. He set it in a cradle and coaxed it with a flick I'd seen him do 100 times and never tire of. The tick came back as if from another room, a little shy, a little surprised to be welcome. I cried, not tragically, but in a tidy way that didn't scare the clocks. Eli said nothing, which was the best gift, and handed me a handkerchief the color of old teacups. "Would you like to wind it?" he asked. My fingers shook but remembered the motion. The key turned with the polite resistance of something doing you a favor because you asked nicely. "Now listen," Eli said. I did. The sound was like a door opening in a house I hadn't visited for years. Not all the rooms were ones I wanted to go into, but the hallway was kind. I wiped my face and laughed. "I feel ridiculous," I said. "You feel like someone who's just put a small boat back in water," he said. "It's a nice feeling." "Do you ever think," I started, then started again. "Do you ever think we carry around jammed gears and just call it personality?" "Every day," he said. "And sometimes it's even true. But some of it is just grit." That was the day I asked if I could come in on Saturdays to help for real. The question surprised me by appearing fully formed at the back of my mouth, impatient to be spoken. I had not planned to ask anything that required me to be known more deeply. "I can dust," I said quickly, "and sweep, and triage the customers who come in with a timeline versus the ones who come in with a story disguised as a batty deadline." Eli smiled. "It's a small shop," he said. "The pay is scandalously fair. You'll get tea." "I don't need pay," I blurted, then realized that was pride talking, not truth. "I need to belong somewhere," he nodded. "That's what the pay is for." Saturday found me at the door before the bell could pretend not to know me. Eli had already lifted the metal grate. The morning sun slid down through the glass roof like a cat claiming a patch of floor. He handed me an apron with a pocket deep enough to hide a wristwatch. "Dust," he said grandly. "Listen." I did both and learned they are the same skill divided by tools. Dust requires attention to the edges, the place where wood meets glass, where face meets case, where a hand can snag. Listening asks for the same loyalty to seam and lip. People began to talk to me as if the brush in my hand gave me authority. Really, it just gave me something to do with the part of me that likes to soothe. A man in a tweed vest with a toffee accent brought in a wall clock that had learned to shout by running fast. "It's been getting ahead of itself all summer," he said, "like a horse that sees the barn from too far away." "We can slow it," I said, and was astonished by the "we" that came out of my mouth. "We can bring it back to itself." He looked a little startled, then relieved. "Good. It's made me feel late for things that haven't begun yet." "That's a tiring way to live," I said. He nodded and put both hands in his pockets, and for a second we were not two strangers in a shop, but two people standing on the same small raft of understanding. Minna came with her niece one afternoon, the girl carrying the mended music box. She wound it and showed me the way the tune had a new calm. Eli watched from his bench, pretending not to be watching. It's a skill he has. The niece had a bell tied on her backpack whose sound made me think of mornings in places where you wake up happy on purpose. Eli put love in it, Minna said to me, as if I doubted. He's got bulk quantities, I said, and both of them grinned. I learned to wrap, brown paper, twine, a way to fold corners that felt like respect, not just neatness. I wrote names in the ledger with the fountain pen when Eli's phone rang and a voice at the other end needed to tell him about a clock before it could let him see it. I learned that most people don't want a repair, they want a reckoning. They want to know if the thing that broke did so on purpose, or because it was asked to hold more than it ought. Sometimes in the late afternoons, when the light came in low and buttery and the shop smelled like the day had worn itself nicely out, Eli would teach me a small thing. How to take a movement out of a case without losing a screw. How to breathe the way your hands need you to when you lift a balance cock. Like you're holding back a laugh, he said, which made me laugh, which made me better at it. He did not teach by naming errors. He taught by naming care. You're good at this, he said once, as I cradled a tiny carriage clock innards in my palm. It stared up at me like a small planet. You listen to the space around the sound. I was too fast at my old life, I said, eyes on the gear I was coaxing home. I was rewarded for speed even when the job was to be right. And now? His voice was easy, as if we were discussing scones. And now I would like to be accurate, I said. The word felt large. I would like my minutes to fit. He nodded. Accuracy is strangely forgiving, he said. It isn't perfection, it's alignment. You can always adjust. That's the nicest thing. People started recognizing me in the village as the one at Eli's. The baker added an extra bun once for the clock girl, which made me blush and tuck the bun into the apron pocket like a contraband joy. A fisherman in a cap with frayed edges tipped the brim at me and said, "How are the minutes behaving?" as if they were weather under my care. My childhood clock took up residence on a small shelf near the bench, not where customers could touch it, but where I could watch it without fusing myself to it. It ticked with a patience I had not learned from the adults who raised me. Sometimes, mid-dusting, I'd feel the panic lean around the corner the way it used to. Does it still work? Will it abandon me? Will it stop with no warning? And then I'd hear it, still counting, and the panic would not know what to do without a reason to become a flood. Do you think it was waiting? I asked Eli one slow hour, when a cat dozed in the sun just inside the open door and the shop held its breath in a pleasant way. I think you were, he said, and the line found its place in me and sat down. Clocks can wait, but they are content to be exactly what they are while they do so. People get ideas. What if it stops again? I asked, making my fear a visitor with a teacup rather than a burglar. Then we will make tea and see if it wants to be a clock or if it wants to be a memory, he said. Either way, it will have work to do. Under the glass roof, the weather moved like a polite crowd. On sunny days, the brass shone and the shop smelled almost citrus with light. On rainy days, the counters drank the dimness and the ticks felt more intimate, as if the shop had put a shawl around its shoulders. I noticed how people altered in the space. The woman with the anniversary watch came back to tell us she'd worn it to the pier and felt her husband in the wind and didn't flinch. Beau returned with his sister, apples wrapped in a bag like contraband, and the hourglass sat firm in his pocket while he told Eli about a story his grandfather used to tell. The one about the fisherman who learned to count by waves and stopped being afraid of the night because the sea didn't care if he was. I took breaks on the step and watched the village make appointments with itself. The postman paused with a letter and listened to the clocks before moving on. Tourists peered in, trying to decide if we were a curiosity or a sanctuary. Both, I decided. A sanctuary is only ever a curiosity to someone who hasn't yet needed one. On a Tuesday with the sea smelling particularly like old pennies, my mother called. I didn't answer. I let it ring and watched the name on the screen like it might perform a trick if I stared hard enough. Later I called her back. We spoke about the weather and the status of her lemon tree, and the thin scratch my father's new wife had left on the lacquered coffee table the last time she'd visited. Then she asked, in the voice people use when they are trying not to intrude, and absolutely are, "Are you all right there?" "I am," I said, and rubbed my thumb over a notch in the bench where other thumbs had rubbed worry into smoothness. "I'm useful." "To who?" "To a shop," I said, laughing. "To a man who fixes time. To people who find their way in with a story and out with a sound." My mother exhaled. "That sounds like church," she said. "It is," I said. "Only we bless with oil and threadlock." That night I wound my mantel clock and my childhood clock and lay in bed and listened to them talk to each other across the room, their ticks slightly unsynced, like two old friends walking out of step because the path is narrow, but their conversation is not. I timed my breath to one, then the other, then let both wash over me until breathing wasn't a job but a fact. On another Saturday, Eli handed me a small tin with 3 screws in it. "Tell me about them," he said, as if I'd been present when they were born. I smiled. We'd begun a game. "This one looks like it's been asked to do more than it has threads for," I said, holding up the slightly stripped one. "This one wants too much attention," I said of the shiny newer screw that didn't match the other two. And this one, I said, turning a screw whose head had a faint scar, remembers being tightened by someone impatient and is wary. And what would you suggest? He asked, as solemn as a dean. Let the wary one rest, I said. Help the overworked one by giving it a better partner. And tell the shiny one to stop performing. We like it, but it can go. He grinned, the kind of grin that makes you feel like you've joined a team you didn't know you were trying out for. Accuracy, he said, not perfection. Alignment, I said. And we moved in the easy silence of people who know where things go. By the end of the month, my hands had steadied in ways my voice hadn't yet learned to trust. I could feel when a gear wanted to be encouraged rather than forced, when a spring was sulking versus truly done. I could tell the difference between a person who wanted their clock by Friday and a person who wanted permission to let it take as long as it took. I knew which customers needed me to say, "We can do it," and which needed me to say, "We can try." I watched Eli too, the way he took breaks exactly when he needed one, not after, not in penance. The way he looked out the door sometimes like a man scanning a horizon only he knew, and then nodded when whatever he'd seen told him to return to his bench. The way his hands never pretended to be 20. They moved with the grace of the present, which might be my favorite thing I've learned in a long time. On the last Sunday of the month, I took my clock down at home and dusted it the way I'd learned to at the shop, brush small and thoughtful. I whispered, which felt goofy and also necessary. Thank you for waiting. It ticked. I laughed. The cottage felt like it had leaned in to hear me. The thistle-sprigged wallpaper less like a reminder of sharpness and more like a pattern in a sweater your grandmother knit. Old, a little scratchy, warm. Monday morning I was at the shop before Eli. I wanted to sweep before the day put its feet on the floor. When I pulled up the grate, a girl about 7 was standing there, peering in, her face a moon pressed to the glass. She started back like a fox when I opened the door, then smiled in that extremely practical way children do when they've decided you aren't dangerous. "Hello," I said. "We aren't open yet, but you can listen." She tilted her head. "My mom says you fix time," she said. "Does that mean you can make my birthday come faster?" I laughed. "We don't do that kind of magic," I said. "We do the kind that makes waiting less mean." "Oh," she said, considering. "That's good too." She looked past me at the rows of faces. "Do they all agree?" "About what?" "What time it is?" "Mostly," I said. "The ones that don't are learning." I leaned down. "Me too." She nodded, satisfied. "I'll come back with my mom," she said. "She has a clock that's been sad for a long time." "We'll be here," I said, and watched her walk away, her backpack bouncing like a heartbeat. I went inside and closed the door and stood with the clocks and let them do what they do best, count in a way that made my body believe in counting again. When Eli came in a few minutes later, wind ruffling his hair like an old friend, I told him about the girl's birthday and how she asked if we could hurry it up. He shook his head, smiling. "If only," he said. "But we have another trick." "What's that?" "We make the in-between count," he said. I thought of the woman in the watch, of Bo and his hourglass, of my own clock ticking like a bird nest that somehow found its way back to the tree. I thought of the dust leaving wood and the way listening had taught me to stand still without punishment. "I'm learning," I said. "You are?" he said. "Now shall we do the day?" We did. We opened the door to the fog and the sun and the people who needed to be held by the sound of small hammers keeping a promise. And I, who had once measured my worth in tasks completed fast enough to impress someone whose name I don't say anymore, began to measure it in the number of times I remembered to breathe in time with a clock that had waited for me. Somewhere mid-morning, while I wound a clock that wore a dent like a dimple, I realized the hook that had pulled me into the shop the first day had not released me. It had changed shape. It wasn't a hook anymore, not something snagging me away from myself. It was a stitch, and my life was starting one neat loop at a time to hold. The first time I breathed with a mainspring, it answered me, just a small easing under my fingertips, as if the clock and I had agreed to stop bracing at the same moment. Mornings began with the rasp of the grate, the soft complaint of the bell, and Eli's good, in that way he has of pronouncing a whole weather report and welcome in one syllable. I tied on the apron he'd given me with the deep pocket, a pocket so generous it could hide uncertainty and a wristwatch at once, and set the kettle to its work. If the world outside wanted to hurry, it had to wait on the step. In here the seconds moved like a faithful old dog, always along, never ahead, never behind. Eli started teaching me the slow grammar of clocks. We didn't use words like lesson and curriculum. We used words like show me and watch this and hold your breath with me. He set out a tray one morning, 3 movements, each no bigger than the palm of my hand. He pointed to the same path in each, the train of gears that takes energy from mainspring to hands. "There's a logic to motion," he said. "You don't have to force yourself to understand it. Let your eye be pulled along." I followed the teeth as they offered themselves to one another, wheel to pinion, larger to smaller. The center wheel that turns the minute hand, the third wheel, the fourth, and at last the escape wheel caught by the pallet fork that allowed the balance to beat. He made it sound like a story with the kind of plot you can trust even when you don't know the ending. I liked that. I'd relocated across counties without a plot, and here one presented itself with brass certainty. Think of the escapement as a kind teacher, he said another day, lifting a jeweled balance with tweezers he held like he'd taken a vow never to pinch. It doesn't give everything at once. It gives little bits evenly. That's kindness. I practiced with the wrecks, as Eli affectionately called the necessary unlovelies. A clock salvaged from the flood whose plates were stained the color of oversteeped tea. A travel alarm that had been slept on, borrowed by a dog, its owner confessed. Its crystal cracked and its indignation loud. A mantel clock that had sat above a coal fire for so long it had inhaled soot like a vice. "You won't hurt them," Eli said. "They're already bruised." He showed me how to lay a movement down on the bench so that gravity became ally instead of saboteur. "Don't hold your breath as punishment," he said. "Hold it like a courtesy." He said it so casually I didn't cry until later, over the sink while washing the tea things. Courtesy, what a reason to pause. People came and brought more than clocks. They brought the minute they couldn't forgive, the afternoon that ran too long, the limping hour. The shop had changed them without their noticing. They came prepared to hand over a story because they had watched other stories be received without flinching. I put the kettle on earlier and started keeping a small tin of biscuits behind the ledgers, because a person can talk longer and truer when there's something to break with their fingers. I put a notebook on the shelf above my stool and wrote in it when the day had quieted to the steadiness of late afternoon. "Stories," the first page said, and beneath it in a smaller hand, "paired with return to life." It made me sound grander than I was. It made the work sound like what it felt like. The old man came on a Tuesday that smelled like damp rope and orange peel. He stepped in as if the shop might mistake him for a draft and push him back out. His coat had shiny elbows. The clock he carried was not a clock at all, but a pocket watch, stopped at 6:12, the second hand midway between ticks like a person caught between words. "Morning," I said. "Come sit." He shook his head. "Standing's honest," he said, but he stood in that careful way that means a person is used to falling into chairs hard and didn't trust himself not to. He set the watch down and looked at it as if it might run if he stared kindly enough. Eli came from the back. You could feel the shop shift subtly to accommodate another old man's gravity. "Tell us," Eli said. The man kept his eyes on the watch. "Belonged to my father," he said. And then, after a breath that looked like it cost him more than he'd expected, "To me, then." "Stopped?" I asked. "Years." He swallowed. "Since Ada left." Another swallow. "My daughter." Eli nodded, slow. We heard that kind of name here, names spoken like prayer or apology. "What would you like it to do?" he asked. It is a question that doesn't sound like much until you realize how few people have asked you it directly. I'd like it to give me an excuse, the man said, almost smiling. I'd like to say the watch was broken when she asks me why I never wrote. I'd like it to have the decency to take the blame. I poured tea and put the cup near his hand without asking. He didn't pick it up right away. And if it runs? He stared at the stopped second hand. Then it runs, he said, and his voice, under the gruffness, carried a frightened tenderness I'd only ever heard once before. In my own voice, the afternoon I held my childhood clock, newly ticking, and admitted I had wanted it dead so I wouldn't have to feel abandoned by it again. Let's see what it tells us, Eli said, and lifted the back with that little twist of wrist that always looked like untying a knot. He glanced at me and cocked his head. The "come closer" that had replaced whole paragraphs of teaching. I did, and bent over the watch with him. I smelled old tobacco and the penny tang of old brass and the bite of fresh oil waiting its turn. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. "Dust," I said. "The kind that remembers pockets, a dried oil scar, a hairspring a little compressed, and the balance staff." I squinted. "It looks straight. Is that possible?" "Possible," he said. "Not common, but possible." He looked to the old man. "Some things stop without being shattered. They simply can't do both jobs at once. Be a watch and be your witness." The old man blinked. He took up the tea with both hands like it might bite him and drank. "If you fix it," he said, "will you write her address down on a card for me?" I kept it in my head, and then my head went and washed it. "We can do better than a card," I said. "We can find a stamp." I felt the boldness of the shop move into my bones. "And you can write now. We'll post it at the top of the lane." He looked at me as if to gauge whether I was the sort of person who would leave a letter between ledgers and forget it there. Whatever he saw decided in my favor. "All right," he said, and his mouth made the shape of a thank you without sound. While Eli cleaned the watch, I brought a note card and a pen and set them on the bench. The old man hunched over and wrote the first line 6 times, each one worse than the last. "She hates fuss," he muttered, and then drew a square around the least fussy of the attempts. "Dear Ada," he wrote, and time advanced a notch. The watch began to beat as if embarrassed by its own sudden eagerness. The old man cried in the spare way men cry when the room has made it safe to do so and they don't want to make a speech of it. He signed the note, folded it around the watch's small thumb, and let both sit there a while, sharing a pulse. I wrote it down in the notebook later. "Dear Ada," old man, elbows shiny. Watch. Waltham, 1923. Dried oil, compressed spring. Back to life with patience and a clean. Tea with 1 sugar, untouched until it wasn't. Wrote the first line 6 times. Kept the least fussy. Letter posted at 1/4 past. Watch set to the harbor bell. A day later, a baker came in with flour on her lashes and a kitchen timer that had become a bully. I knew her by her bun, which was the messy crown you get when you wake at 4 and work until your arms forget they're made of bones. She set the timer down as if it might scold her for being late. "It's me," she said, not looking at it. "I'm the broken thing." I poured tea and pushed the tin of biscuits across the counter. "Sit," I said. "Tell us which part." She did. The words came like dough falling into a bowl, heavy but with a promise if you work them. "I don't know if I love baking or if I love being known for loving baking," she said. "I don't know if getting up at 4 every day is devotion or a habit I mistook for faith. I don't know when I stopped wanting to taste my own lemon curd. I don't know who I am if I don't bring a tray to the window and feel people smile at me." "The timer?" Eli asked gently. "I set it and my chest tightens," she said, startled by her own confession. "I hear it click, and I think, by the time this rings, you must have proved it again." We did not fix the timer that day. We wrapped it in tissue and told it to think about its behavior. We made the baker drink tea with honey and sit in the good chair by the door where she could listen to the clocks that didn't nag. "You don't have to prove it to this room," I said. "You can let the timer be the thing that counts while you do the thing that loves." She laughed a little, rubbed at her lash where flour had gone white as a lie. "What if I don't love it?" "Then you will learn to love something else," Eli said simply, "and the people will adjust the muscles of their smiles." She came back 2 days later with a loaf of sourdough that crackled like fresh paper and said, "I didn't set the timer for the pre-ferment. I watched it." She put the loaf down and looked shy. "It was quieter." I wrote her down too. Baker, flower lashes, bun like a comet. Timer, not broken, just bossy. Prescribed, tea, chair, clocks that count without nagging. Outcome, watched pre-ferment instead of setting, found a small quiet. Between people, I learned to lift a balance cock without losing a jewel, to feel with the pad of a finger whether a pivot was sullen or willing. My hands, which had once been trained to prove worth in speed, slowed so the small parts could tolerate me. Eli would lean over sometimes and murmur, "Less insistence, more invitation." I would soften everything, breath, palm, mind, and the screw would start itself home. I began hearing my own mind differently too. Less insistence, more invitation. "Holly, be kind." Other stories arrived and took their place on the shelves between carriage clocks and box lids. A teenager with ink on his cuffs brought in a digital watch that beeped a bitter little beeping every hour. "My stepdad gave it to me," he said. I'm trying not to make that mean anything. We showed him how to turn the hourly chime off. He looked relieved and bereft at once. "Now you choose what means," I said, and he flicked me a startled grin and left humming too loudly on purpose. The postman came in on a windy morning to ask if we could fix his lateness. We offered him tea. He laughed and left us 3 undeliverable letters with windows cut in their faces. "For your notebook," he said, and I pasted one envelope on the inside cover and wrote over the window, "You can see the address if the light is right." A woman brought in a clock that had belonged to her mother's kitchen and said simply, "I miss her hands." We stood in silence and let the ticking of the shop lay a hand on the countertop between us. "We can keep the face," Eli said, "and give it a new engine." She nodded and cried and said, "That's what the hospice did for her." I wrote and wrote. Teen, ink cuffs. Digital, chime off, told him meaning is his. Postman, windy morning. Lateness, not reparable. Donation, 3 undeliverables. Kitchen clock, mother's hands. Face kept, engine replaced, family resemblance preserved. Some afternoons when the shop went golden with the slanting sun through the glass roof, Eli would sit with me at the bench and ask me to tell him the day and the order the seconds had chosen. I would, and he would nod, inserting a note here or there, a gentle revision. That one came in grieving. You could hear it in the way the door latch bristled. "Make sure the notebook remembers the door," he'd say. Or, "You gave that man permission to be lazy. He needed permission to be careful." I'd take the correction the way I'd been taught to take a screw. Less insistence, more invitation, and the day would tighten into sense. I began labeling the stories in a way the notebook allowed me to find them fast. Watch plus letter, timer plus love, face plus engine, chime plus meaning. I didn't know what I would do with the notebook besides write in it. That was enough. Learning the art itself seeped into my bones with the stories. I found solace in the steps that required me to align more than think, meshing the train wheels so that backlash didn't bully the motion, adjusting a beat error until the tick and talk landed the same length from center. "Beat error is just a clock's limp," Eli said. "You correct it so the walk doesn't hurt." I liked that there were objective measures, amplitude, rate, draw, that could still be approached with gentle conversation. If I breathed evenly, the timing machine calmed too. If I rushed, the trace skittered a little, as if even the instrument had learned the shop's personality. One evening, after we'd shut the door and left the room to talk to itself in ticks and sighs, I lingered with my notebook. I flipped back to the first page and read myself into the present. There I was, scrubbing a dried oil scar from a Waltham while an old man wrote, "Dear Ada." There I was, not fixing a timer but loosening a sentence around a baker's throat. There I was, naming parts of a movement I could have sworn belonged only to people born with patience. "Whatever you're doing," Eli said from the doorway, putting on his cardigan like a dusk. "Do more of that." "I'm cataloging," I said. "It helps." "Cataloging the living," he said, pleased. "Excellent habit." "Do you think it matters?" I asked. "The notebook, I mean. Or is it just my way of trying to keep the day from blowing away?" "Yes," he said. Then, because he is kind, and also it matters. We started setting a second mug whenever a customer came in with a heavy story. One for tea immediately, one for tea after. "People need a tomorrow in the shape of a cup," I said once, and Eli made a sound like a laugh that didn't want to startle anything. We put a tin of postcards on the counter with a sign, "Write while you wait." Not everyone did. Enough did. The old man came back 2 weeks after his dear Ada and stood in the doorway like a post he wasn't sure he'd been meant to lean on. "She wrote back," he said. He showed me the envelope and didn't let go of it while I read. "Dear Dad," it said, "you made it to the first line." He cried properly then, shoulders and all, and left the watch for a clean as a celebration, he said. The baker put a note in the tin. Today I loved the smell again. I added it to the notebook. Timer plus love, smell returned, quiet. In the middle of all this, I learned to fail kindly. A German wall clock came in with a bent pivot I was sure I could persuade back into virtue. I couldn't. The steel snapped like a thin opinion. I stared at it, horror prickling in my scalp. Eli touched my wrist. "Good," he said. "Now you'll learn pivots aren't moral questions." We ordered a new arbor, and I added a new label to the notebook. Break plus begin again. At home, my mantel clock and my childhood clock talked across the room the way they always did. I had begun to recognize their different accents. The mantel was a little more formal, tick as statement, talk as agreement. The childhood clock had a shy swing, a whisper of the pause it had once taken. Some nights I matched my breath to one. Some nights I matched to both, 3 ticks in, 6 out, until my lungs believed again that the world would keep moving if I rested. On a Thursday dusk, when the shop held the day's warmth like a loaf cooling under a towel, a woman came in and didn't bring anything at all. She stood and looked at the shelves as if one of the clocks might volunteer to follow her home. "I left my watch in the sea," she said finally. "On purpose. I wanted to know what time would do without me." "What did it do?" I asked. "Kept going," she said, bleak and relieved. "I hate that and love that." We made tea because there is nothing else to do when a paradox is sitting at the counter. She sipped and listened and left with a postcard addressed to herself. "Keep going, with me," it said. I paired her in the notebook with a carriage clock that had sat quietly on the bench all afternoon, and only now, as I wrote, had the decency to start beating again. Sometimes the shop was empty, and it was just Eli and me and the polite riot of time. Those were the moments I learned the most. He'd tell me about the watchmaker who taught him to let his jaw rest so his shoulders could. He'd lean his shoulder into mine for a second. "Look, I've still got a shoulder," he'd say, and then go back to his loop. I'd tell him about the way my old office smelled like a printer warming up, and the way I'd confused urgent for important until I no longer knew the difference. We didn't process. We just let the ticks carry the bits of memory like boats. "Why clocks?" I asked him once, while we both pretended not to watch the door in case someone who needed us would appear. "Because they'll tell you if you're being a bully," he said. "Because they don't flatter. Because when they forgive you, they mean it." I nodded and wrote that down. And still, under gears and oil and tea, the conversations kept their gentle shape. The old man wrote a second letter. The baker brought us a lemon tart and left with a timer set to optional. The teenager with ink cuffs came back with a note from his stepdad. "Teach me how to turn the noise off." We showed him the button. At the end of the month, I launched a new ritual without announcing it. After we closed, I wound one clock from each shelf while naming the person I'd paired with it in the notebook. Not out loud, just in the soft place the shop had given me, the one between breath and action. "Dear Ada," I'd think, winding the Waltham. Flower lashes, winding a kitchen clock that had found its mother again. Chime plus meaning, touching the digital with 2 fingers in a blessing that was really a habit. Eli caught me the 3rd evening and didn't say anything out loud either. He just set another key in front of me like a second spoon at a table. "I didn't know I could love brass," I said to him when we stepped out into the lane and watched the fog, back again, glad of its old haunts, fold itself around the village. "You don't," he said. "You love what brass lets you practice." "And what's that?" "Staying," he said. "Listening. Gentle conversation." At home that night, I opened my notebook and read it like a small book. It was messy and full of tea rings. It smelled like oil and orange peel and the ghosts of biscuits. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "Gears and gentle conversations." And below it, "Lesson learned today. Beat error is a limp, not a verdict. Meaning is a button you can turn off. Love is sometimes watching dough instead of timing it. Some clocks wait until we're ready, so do we." Then I put the notebook under my pillow like a child who believes in talismans, and I slept with my 2 clocks counting the night in even kindness. In the morning, I would lift the grate, put the kettle on, and learn how to let a spring down without frightening it. In the afternoon, I'd label a story, Letter plus Watch, Part 2. In between, I would offer tea to whoever came through the door, and I would write, not to keep the day from blowing away, but to prove to myself what the shop had already proved. Time and other things that break can be talked back into themselves. The night I learned that time knew my name, it arrived wrapped in velvet. It was late in the way the shop defines it, which is to say the door was already locked and the ticks had taken off their good manners and settled into their pajamas. Even the kettle had the drowsy hum of something that had done its share of work and was content to sit warm. Eli and I were finishing the kind of silence that means the day held. Nothing dropped, nobody left unheard. He'd just set a tiny brass hand onto a dial with the pleased concentration of a person fitting the last piece of a jigsaw, when he wiped his fingers, nodded to himself, and reached under the bench. He placed the bundle in front of me like a loaf still radiating its own heat. Deep brown velvet, old but cared for, tied with a length of faded ribbon that had been blue once and now couldn't be bothered to prove it. The packet was only as big as my two hands cupped together. It changed the air anyway. The ticks leaned in. Even the good chair by the door looked interested. "For me?" I said, and heard the way my voice tried to sound casual and failed, like a child pretending not to hope. "For you," he said. He pushed his glasses up his nose and glanced away as if to give me privacy without leaving the room. "Open it here if you like, or take it home and open it in company with your thistle wallpaper. Both are reasonable churches." I breathed, and the velvet had its own smell, walnut and lemon peel. Beneath that, the faint clean of old drawers. My fingers remembered, careful. I loosened the ribbon and felt the knot yield the way a decision does when it's been ready for hours. The velvet folded back like a small curtain and revealed a case the color of good tea, edges softened by years of being carried without complaint. A travel clock, I thought, but one with ideas. Sturdy, dignified, not a toy. On top, tucked under the ribbon, a note in Eli's fountain pen hand. "This one is yours now." Something under my sternum stood up. I looked at him. He didn't smile the way people do when they've planned a surprise and are waiting for their applause. He looked like a man introducing two friends who have already loved each other for years. I opened the case. The dial was cream with numerals that had gone sepia with time, the hands fine and dark as a promise. There were tiny hairline scratches at 2 and 10 the way faces acquire lines from laughing. I reached out and touched the bezel and felt, absurdly, the kind of recognition that makes your bones behave. "Eli," I said, "turn it over." He said gently. The back plate had a circle of wear from being opened and closed, an oval where a thumb had known it. Along one edge, so small you'd miss it if you hadn't been trained by this room to look for small, there was an engraving. Not showy, not enviable, not meant for anyone who wasn't meant for it. 3 letters intertwined. EMR, my grandmother's initials. I didn't make a sound big enough to scare the clocks. It was more like the room took a breath and gave it to me. The air smelled like oil and orange and the first pale, far-off notes of rain. My vision did a soft thing around the edges, like a lens, realizing the center matters most. And inside that soft, the engraving remained exactly itself, unblurred, sure. How? I asked. It came out small and enormous. Eli leaned his elbows on the bench and arranged his mouth into a line that meant he'd tell the story in the order it deserved. A box arrived the month before you did, he said, after a house clearance from the next county. Someone who wrote me because an uncle had been the kind of man who wound clocks without asking for thanks. The family sent a baker's dozen of orphans and said, "Find them better homes than the loft." This was among them. He nodded at the clock, as if it had been listening politely and would now like to be acknowledged. It didn't run, but it wanted to. You didn't know then. I didn't know then, he agreed. I cleaned it the way one cleans a thing without a story, kindly and with the humility that you might be the first hands on it, and maybe you aren't. I put it on the shelf in the back corner to find its opinion about being alive again. Then you arrived with your fog and your good listening and your habit of dusting as if dust were grateful. His eyes did that small crinkle that means he's not teasing so much as loving a truth. You told me about the woman who raised you, the way she didn't wear perfume because she said soap already did the job, the way she told you to trust the quiet things, the way she let you keep the weird collection of ticket stubs in a tin and never once called it clutter. The way she knitted sleeves longer than sleeves needed to be because you liked hiding your hands in them. You said she kept a clock in her bedroom that ticked like a satisfied cat. I could see my grandmother's room with the detail that has nothing to do with eyes. The low chest of drawers with the runner she embroidered herself, small, tidy violets. The sun that liked the left-hand corner mid-morning. The short pencil she kept by the stack of postcards she never mailed because writing a thing is half of sending it, and sometimes half is plenty. I saw the clock on her bedside table, square and modest, its case smooth from the years she rubbed its edges the way people rub prayer beads. I'd fallen asleep in that bed on sick days, the tick a metronome I could nail my breath to. I looked at the engraving again and made the mistake of making the letters stand for her name. Eleanor May Ross. Hers. Another breath. Mine. And the past did that wobbly dissolve you see in old films right before the plot delivers the thing you hoped for and didn't believe you'd deserve. Where did it go? I asked, ridiculous. After she died? Your mother sold the house, he said, not unkindly. People gather the obvious and the efficient and leave the shy things to fend for themselves. It's not a moral failing, it's a weather pattern. This went into a box in a loft where mice have opinions. Then the estate clear. He didn't finish because I had already done the rest. A chain of hands, a van, a paper taped to a flap. Clocks. the shape of this small one settling against others, the way objects resign themselves gracefully when given a job like wait. It was waiting, I whispered, hearing the echo of his earlier generosity about my childhood clock. For me, it was waiting for someone who trusted quiet, he said. You qualify. He tapped the bench, a small, firm sound. And because it is neither prudent nor kind to make a person prove they deserve their inheritance by list, I waited for a day that felt steady enough to hand you a velvet bag. You knew? I asked, laughing like someone on a swing too high and not entirely ready to jump. You recognized, Eli shrugged. I recognized the initials after you'd said her name enough times that the shop learned to say it too. He inclined his head toward the engraving. Once the back is clean, letters are not shy forever. My hands found the edges of the clock the way a person finds the frame of a picture they've placed back on a wall straight. The case was warm from the room. The dial's glass had that faint, wavy look old glass has, the kind that makes the world around it gentler. Does it run? I asked, because I had to ask something that didn't threaten tears. It runs, he said, and when it errs on the side of not hurrying a person out the door. Like her, I said. She was always late in a way that made everyone less nervous. He smiled. Wind it. I turned the little key. The resistance was the kind that makes you feel accompanied. Not fight, not flop. Just a firm hand you can lean into. A few turns, the spring gathered itself. Eli set the clock on the felt and tapped the balance with the tip of his screwdriver, and the tick began like a small animal taking first steps, then found itself, then was simply there. I matched my breath as I always do. 3 ticks in, 6 out. The room softened, the way rooms do when kindness has entered them. I thought I would weep. Instead, I laughed. It wasn't even a sound, more like a shape my mouth made with the air. I could hear my grandmother talking about little pleasures that don't ask to be admired, as if she were sitting in the good chair and pretending not to eavesdrop on the conversation between my heart and the clock. Thank you, I said. And even I wasn't sure whether I was thanking Eli or the small brass city in my hands, or the woman who taught me to breathe evenly while untangling yarn. You're welcome, Eli said. There is one more thing. He reached into the drawer under the bench and brought out a small square of paper, yellowing but careful. It was the kind of paper once sold in stationers that smelled like wood shavings and earnestness. In the corner, in my grandmother's tidy, narrow script, 5 words. Trust the quiet things, Holly. The paper lived in the back cavity, under the plate. He'd taken it out, I realized, when he cleaned. He'd folded it back so the name was inside while he was listening to my stories. He'd waited until this minute to unfold it. I held it with the clock, one in each hand, balanced. It felt like the most literal possible definition of being held up by love. T, Eli said, because there are moments the world needs to be walked gently through its own goodness. He put the kettle on. He didn't fuss. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He put a biscuit on a saucer. He left the note and the clock where they were and let me look without supervision. When the tea came, I was ready to talk again, which is to say, I was ready to ask questions, the answers to which I would survive. "How long have you known?" I asked. "A while," he said. "But I wanted the clock to recognize you. That is not a sentence I say outside this room. People start writing letters to the editor." His eyes softened. Objects can be stubborn. They also have a talent for consenting at the right time. I watched you in here, how you listen to people without trying to fix their sentences, how you let a spring down without frightening it, how you write in your notebook as if the stories are not yours but pass through you with good manners. The day you told the baker she didn't have to make the timer the boss if she could love the dough. Well, he lifted one shoulder. That was the day this wanted to be yours. I didn't think, I started, stopped. I didn't know gifts could be so accurate. That's because you have been given a lot of gifts that were either substitutions for apologies or ways to keep you in a particular room, he said, not unkindly. This is neither. I put the note back under the back plate for a moment, just to see if I could bear the sight of the engraving without the prompt. I could. The letters read themselves to me willingly now, like old friends who've decided it's all right to show up without mascara. When I tucked the note into my notebook later, a little envelope made of the right page so it wouldn't go wandering, I wrote under a new heading, "A clock with my name." Next to it, travel clock, cream dial, hairline scratches at 2 and 10, engraved EMR back cavity, note, "Trust the quiet things, Holly." Gifted after closing, tea with biscuit, room leaned in. Under that I added, because I am the kind of person who wants to remember the feel as well as the facts. Wind felt like saying yes, tick like a cat. I carried the clock home wrapped not in the velvet. Eli folded that and put it away for the next kindness, but in a piece of flannel that smelled like the drawer it had lived in. I did not hurry. The lane had the blue tiredness of a day that had forgiven itself. The harbor was a dark ear listening to the village. The baker's window was dark and the little bell on her door asleep. I passed Minna's shop and thought of her niece's music box that now played in a gentler key. I passed the post box where Ada's father had posted his trembling note. I passed the house where the teenager with ink on his cuffs probably lay listening to the absence of his watch's hourly nag. In the cottage, I did a small rearrange. The mantel clock, my own purchase, kept its post on the shelf where the thistle wallpaper looks more like a botanical illustration than a warning. The childhood clock sat across from it, a shy sentinel. I put my grandmother's clock on the bedside table where my paperbacks and pens live. It made a different sound there than it had on the bench, as if relieved to be in a room where someone sleeps. The tick filled the edges without bullying the middle. I looked at it, and it looked at me, and we both decided to be ourselves at the same time. Before I climbed into bed, I did a thing I hadn't done since childhood. I pressed my fingertip to the clock's glass and counted the oil-soft prints I left, then wiped them away with the edge of my pillowcase because my grandmother would have. "Clocks are happier unsmudged," she would say, "not stern, just true." I wound it, 3 turns exactly, because I wanted to start as I meant to go on, in relationship. Then I held the note again and whispered, "I will." I slid the note into my notebook's inner pocket, where my categories had grown to include mysteries I hadn't yet named. Tonight, a new label, name plus return. Then I turned off the light and lay down, and there it was, immediate and patient. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The steadiness wasn't merely background. It was an invitation to meet myself without the slightly hysterical voice that used to turn on the instant the dark did. I matched my breathing because my body knows to do that now. 3 ticks in, 6 out, fair enough. And under that old shop mantra, a new one, my grandmother's voice sliding over it and not canceling anything, just widening it. Trust the quiet things. I thought of the nights in my old apartment when quiet felt like an accusation. What are you doing with your life? What have you wasted? Why aren't you more? Why aren't you different? I thought of the radiator knocking with the impatience of a neighbor, the emails arriving with their insistent chirps. I thought of the way I used to meet my pillow like an enemy and proposition my duvet like a deal. I thought of all that, and then I watched it go stand in the corner with its nose to the wall because a clock had sat down beside me and told the truth with no agenda. My breathing did not scramble. My toes warmed without needing me to decide they deserved it. I didn't have to run a reel of today's mistakes to prove I'd earned rest. The clock and I made a truce that felt so obvious I wanted to apologize for making a fuss for years. I woke once to turn over and check the time, and the face glowed just enough to be kind without showing off. The hands were at 2:17, and I thought, stupidly and beautifully, that is exactly where you should be. The room smelled like night and wool and a whisper of oil, and I fell back into sleep like a diver who trusts the water. In the morning I woke rested in a way that made me briefly suspicious. I lay there and listened to the last few inches of the night drain away without needing me to supervise. Then I got up, made tea, and took the clock into the kitchen as if I might show it the view from the sink. The harbor sat minding its own deep business. The sky had found a blue that promised more fog if it got the chance. I wrote in the notebook while the kettle sighed, slept, soundly. I underlined soundly because the word earned it. At the shop, Eli was already there, grayed up, door propped, the air doing that polite thing where it knew it was coming into a place that required a certain tone. I held up the clock. He nodded, businesslike, pleased. No grandstanding. "Well?" he asked. "It makes the dark behave," I said. "Good," he said, and handed me a brush. "Dust the shelf with the deco fellows. They took last night's weather personally." We sorted the day. Letters into the tin, tea into mugs, people into the gentle slot where their stories could sit without rolling off the counter. The old man came to tell us that Ada had called him Dad on the phone, as if he'd passed the exam. The baker put a postcard in the tin, tasted my lemon curd, wanted it, and left a loaf with a slash so pretty it felt like handwriting. A boy came with a star-shaped kitchen timer he'd won at a fair, and asked if we could make it stop sounding like a smoke alarm. We could. I wrote everything down. At some point between the tide turning and the sun deciding to show off against the glass roof, Eli leaned on his elbows and said offhand, "We will need to make you a bench." "For me?" I repeated, foolish with the same particular joy as the velvet had woken. "A real one?" "You've been doing real work on a stool," he said. "It feels like making you read all the good books while standing up." We measured the space with a length of tape he kept looped around a hook. "Here," he said. "You want to be in the corner where the light is steady, not dramatic. Drama is for people who want credit for being alive." He knuckled the place where the bench would sit. "We'll put the timing machine at your left so your right hand can sulk when it needs to. A little drawer for your notebook so you can pretend you don't write down everything." "I don't write down everything," I said, indignant, and added in my head, "I write down enough." During the lull that always arrives the first hour after lunch, I took the clock from my bag and set it on the bench, just to see how it looked with its cousins. It looked at home without competing. Eli pretended not to notice. The clocks noticed and made room the way polite people at a long table do. A woman in her 70s came in with a carriage clock that had the smug of a cat who's found the warmest patch of sun. "It runs," she said, "but it's rude about it, too loud." My husband never minded. He could sleep through a brass band. I can't. We set it down, listened, agreed. "You're allowed to require manners from the living," I said. She grinned shamelessly. We adjusted the beat, lowered the seat a whisper, put a drop of oil where it forgave, and the clock softened. "Better," she said. "I feel loved." We laughed. The shop listened, pleased. When she'd gone, I wrote, "Carriage plus manners. Beat tamed, oil where forgiveness lives. Outcome, loved." And below that, almost without thinking, I added, "EMR at my bedside. Dark behaved." I let myself draw a small heart next to the initials and didn't cross it out. I don't know when I'll stop being amazed by the way a life can turn toward you without fanfare. The bench measured, the velvet folded away for the next kindness. The kettle learning with the rest of us, the pace of the room. My grandmother's note in my pocket like a secret with no shame in it. A clock that says my name, not because it shouts it, because it doesn't have to. That night I wound it again, 3 turns. Why argue with what works? And whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The answer came in the form I trust most now, regular, honest, soft. I slept soundly, and in the morning I did not rush to check that it had kept its promise. I knew. That might be the greater miracle than the engraving, than the note. I knew. The morning Eli left, the clocks didn't falter. I did. He'd chosen a Tuesday, the kind of day that asks nothing special of anybody. The harbor yawned fog into the lane. The baker's window steamed, and our kettle in the back clicked awake, patient as ever. There was no speech, no slice of cake with a candle in it. There was a cardboard box that once held oranges, the word Valencia's ghosted along the side. There was his cardigan folded on top of a stack of old journals. There was a small, quiet envelope with my name in his steady hand. There were his keys on the bench, not tossed but laid down like a final tool. He hugged me the way people hug when they refuse to make the leaving the most interesting part of the story. "You were always going to be the keeper," he said into my hair. And then he stepped back and looked at the room, not to say goodbye to it, but to approve of how it was standing. "My granddaughter's having twins," he added, in that tone he saved for facts that needed no embellishment. "I'm going to go hold what the world is making." "Right," I said, because my mouth had to do something. "I will send you letters timed to the harbor bells," he said, and then he was at the door, then in it, then through it. Just a man walking into a different hour, the way we all do every day. Only usually we pretend not to notice. I didn't cry in the way that drowns a room. I cried the way the shop taught me, slowly with a cloth handy, and while putting the kettle on. The envelope had weight, not from content, but from intention. I opened it with the little bone knife he'd given me for edges. Inside, 1 sheet, and on it a single line in his clean script. "You're already doing what I did, letting time do its other job, healing." Below it, a drawing of a key, his game for children, for me, and a note. "The sign is yours to rename." I turned the paper over because hope and habit both taught me there might be more. There wasn't. I didn't need more. I stood in the middle of the shop, the glass roof admitting a gray that wasn't sad so much as unspecific, and listened. Ticks like breathing, like patient applause, like a room lending me its backbone. "All right," I said to the clocks. "Let's do the day." I swept, I wound. I opened the ledger and wrote the date in my neatest hand. Under it I wrote, Keeper Holly. It looked both too large and just right. When the first customer came, a fisherman with a cap older than my adulthood and a barometer that liked to exaggerate, I found my mouth knew what to do without checking for permission. "Morning," I said. "We aren't changing the weather, but we can encourage honesty." He laughed in relief. Later, the baker arrived with 2 lemon tarts and a kitchen timer she had demoted to suggestion. "He gone?" she asked, soft. "He's gone to be a grandfather twice," I said. I could say it without splintering. "The shop is staying." "Good," she said. "We like it when time stays." By midday I had read his note 3 more times and touched the keys as if they might change shape under my fingers now that they were mine. I waited until the last person left before I brought the step stool from the back, unhooked the old sign, and laid it across the bench where he had repaired the first watch I ever saw brought back to life with nothing but patience and oil. I sanded the flaking paint until it felt like the bench, honest. I wiped it down. I painted. The letters climbed out of me without rehearsal. Holly's clocks for time and new beginnings. I left the paint to cure and made a small cup of tea I didn't drink before it cooled. Then I took my notebook, the one with tea rings and oil thumbprints and a pocket full of other people's first lines, and turned to a clean page. Chapter 5. The Keeper of Time, I wrote. Underneath, Eli left on a Tuesday that asked nothing. Left keys, left line. You're already doing what I did. Letting time do its other job, healing. And then, because even joy needs a job, I started a list. Paint sign, order paper for new receipts, move timing machine to my bench, buy more biscuits. People will be brave if their hands have something to do. Make a place for letters, keep breathing. At closing, I took my grandmother's clock from my bag and set it on the bench. It regarded me in that polite way it has, tick as if to say, "I'm here," talk as if to ask, "Are you?" "I am," I told it. "I'm the one opening and closing now." The word keeper landed in my chest and didn't rattle. The next morning the sign went up. Minna's niece, whose bells had found their ring again, stood on the pavement and clapped like we were a parade. Beau, hourglass repaired at the seam and kept honest, brought his sister and 3 apples and performed a juggling act that involved more laughing than catching. The old man who'd written Dear Ada arrived with a postcard from his daughter taped to his coat like a boutonniere. "Dad, it's still me." The teenager with ink on his cuffs came with his stepdad, both pretending the other had dragged them, both too proud of each other to hide it properly. The baker set a tray on the step and announced, "I set no timer for these, and they're still beautiful." The postman lent us twine for bunting, and then stayed for tea because my route includes ceremonial duties when asked. We stood and looked at the sign together the way villagers look at the sea, with respect, with history, with a readiness to accept whatever it decided to do next. Then I opened the door, and the bell confessed it had missed being useful. Inside, the clocks did what clocks do when rooms are full of people who need them. They steadied the air. "Welcome," I said, and the word tasted new. I had made changes at dawn while the village stretched. They were the sort that make rooms say thank you without having to find the right phrase. A low shelf near the door with a pot of pencils and a stack of postcards. Write while you wait. A corkboard above it. Leave a line for someone who needs one. A second tin for letters that had nowhere to go yet. Undeliverables for now. A small sign by the kettle that read, "Tea keeps time too. Help yourself." And because I can't pretend who taught me what, I left Eli's loop on its hook and his fountain pen uncapped on the ledger. I laid the bone knife next to mine and placed the velvet bag, kindness in waiting, in the drawer where my hand would find it when it knew before I did that a gift wanted wrapping. People brought clocks and watches and confessions. We mended what we could. We named what we couldn't. We replaced engines and kept faces. We honored faces and accepted new engines. Between we drank tea and talked about what time had done without us and what we had done without it. The first week as keeper, I found myself performing a ritual I hadn't invented so much as remembered. At opening, I wound one clock from each shelf and said the name I'd paired it with in the notebook. Dear Ada for the Waltham. Flower lashes, for the kitchen clock that had found the smell of lemon curd again. Chime plus meaning, for the digital that had learned quiet on purpose. Manners, for the carriage clock that had learned to soften. I wrote a new heading and slid a bookmark there. Keeper's Windings. I could turn to it when my breath caught. Proof that I had already done the morning's first kindness. On the second Tuesday, a woman my age came in holding a clock that had been her grandmother's too. It was a mantel clock with a face that wore its numerals like pearls. The hands were the kind that look like thin leaves. "It runs," she said. "It just runs too sad." I listened. The tick did have a lean, a beat error that made the talk drag its feet. "It's limping," I said. "We can straighten the walk." While I adjusted the crutch and moved the beat toward even, she told me about the house clearance after her grandmother died. The way people had taken lamps and rugs and framed prints and left drawers of buttons because they were not obvious enough to be grief. "I took this," she said. "I don't know why. It sounded like it knew something I didn't." "Most clocks do," I said. She laughed properly. When the beat landed true and the tick and talk stitched equal lengths of silence, she exhaled like a tire relearning how to be a wheel. "Better," she whispered. I can hear her smile in it. I wrote, mantle plus straightened walk. Outcome, smile audible. A boy brought a metronome that had belonged to his piano teacher, and we balanced its pendulum while he told me he'd quit lessons because he hated being bad at something. "You can be bad here," I said. "Clocks don't care. They only ask you to keep showing up." He looked at the metronome, then at his own hands, as if they were instruments he might keep. A couple came in with a watch both had worn through the years when money was thin and time was a currency they tried not to spend stupidly. "We used to pass it between us," the woman said, twisting her wedding band. "Got us to where we said we'd go." It needed a mainspring, nothing dramatic, and I replaced it while they sat together on the good chair, ankles crossed, learning the pleasure of being idle in a room that approved. Minna arrived with her niece and a package wrapped in the comic section of the paper. Inside, a bell with a hairline crack. "We don't want it perfect," her niece said. "We want it to tell the truth kindly." We tuned it against the kitchen clock, and when it rang, the sound was exactly halfway between morning and morning. We kept that bell near the door, and children came to ring it when they left, their palms learning the difference between noise and message. The old man returned with a second letter for Ada, and this time he didn't write the first line 6 times. He wrote it once and said, "I trust my own hand." I paired his note with the watch's service in the ledger and made a little star in the margin I refused to apologize for. At dusk one day, when the shop smelled like oiled brass and lemon tart crumbs, a woman stood staring at the sign as if reading it might rearrange her. "I don't need anything," she said when I invited her in. "I'm trying to decide if I want a new beginning." "Time is good company for deciding," I said. "It doesn't rush you." She sat, and we didn't talk for 10 minutes. We listened to the room instead. When she left, she took a postcard from the tin and wrote, "I don't know yet. Love me anyway." She pinned it to the board herself and nodded like a woman who had begun. I wrote a new label, "Listening plus no repair. Outcome, begun. Not everything I touched cooperated." A regulator clock came in with a bushing so oval it had learned a whole alphabet of wrongness. I overcompensated, pressed a new bushing too tightly, and the train bound. The sound it made was not unlike criticism. I sat with it until my ears stopped inventing Eli's voice and found my own. "Try again, carefully." I did. The wheel turned. The trace on the timing machine steadied. I wrote, "Break plus begin again, Keeper Edition. Lesson, pressure is not persuasion." Letters started arriving from Eli the way he promised, lined up with the harbor bells, as if he had convinced the sea to be his secretary. They weren't reports. Eli doesn't give reports. They were small pieces of attention. The twins sleep like comrades, not like rivals. Your loop fogs in a different climate? Don't fight it. Keep using the velvet bag for kindness. If you think a clock is choosing a person, you're probably right. I propped them on the shelf behind the bench and read them when the room leaned quiet. Sometimes I spoke to him out loud when the door was shut and the final customer's footsteps had faded toward the square. I moved the timing machine, I'd say. The bench fits my ridiculous shoulders. I'm not frightening the springs as often. Or, I told a boy he could be bad at something in here and he believed me. Or the truest thing, it's working. If he could hear, he didn't say. The clocks did, and they ticked as if to confirm. On the first rainy Saturday after the sign went up, the shop filled like a church on a holiday nobody felt guilty for enjoying. People came and stayed, even when they had nothing that required repair. They sat in the good chair and the not bad chair, and on the stool by my bench that Eli used to pull up when he wanted my company and pretended he needed my hands. The postman brought undeliverables on purpose because your board is honest, and a child pinned up a drawing of a clock with arms that were also arms, hugging someone, the minute hand long enough to reach around a small heart. For the keeper, she wrote in a printing that still couldn't be bothered with lowercase. I made a new ritual that day without naming it first. I took the velvet bag from the drawer and put inside it the small, not expensive things that carry outsized amounts of gentleness. A travel alarm whose glow is kind, a kitchen timer whose ring sounds like a spoon against a glass, a pocket watch whose case is warm even before you hold it. I kept the bag near the bench and didn't look at it unless someone's story told me I would need to. In the afternoon, a student came in with a borrowed clock he'd broken during a move. He needed it fixed, but what he really needed was permission to admit he was frightened of failing his course and even more frightened of telling his parents. I cleaned the movement and oiled the pivot, yes, but when he stood to go, I handed him the velvet bag. "There's a small alarm in there," I said. "It's steadier than you feel. Borrow it until you trust your own steadiness." He blinked, tried to refuse, failed, promised to return it, and left with his shoulders 2 degrees lower. I wrote, "Velvet plus loan, outcome, borrowed steadiness." Evenings changed. Before, I had carried the shop's hum home with me like a coat I wasn't ready to hang up. Now I found myself leaving it on the hook by the door, not in abandonment, but in trust. My grandmother's clock at my bedside kept the dark from misbehaving. My childhood clock across the room answered in its shy dialect. The mantel in the hall announced the hours if I wanted them and shut up if I didn't. I learned to cook without a timer, watching the edges of a pancake for bubbles, trusting the smell of toast more than the setting on the toaster. When I did set a timer, I didn't flinch when it rang. I wrote less at night and more in the morning, as if the day preferred to be named before it volunteered. In the notebook, I made a new page for the sign, Holly's Clocks, for time and new beginnings. Beneath it, I listed what counted as a new beginning today. First time someone called me keeper and meant it. Baker tasted lemon curd and wanted it. Teen taught stepdad to turn off hourly chime. Old man wrote Dear Ada without apologizing for being late. At the bottom, I wrote my grandmother's phrase because it was the only benediction that fit. Trust the quiet things. Weeks did what weeks do. We repaired. We failed and amended. We made tea. We added a second kettle for busy afternoons and pretended it was always for guests, never for ourselves. We put up a small chalkboard near the door. Today's gentle words. People wrote their own. You can be slow and still be good. You're allowed to change. Some clocks wait until we're ready. Some of us are clocks. On a late afternoon when the glass roof gathered the rain and laid it down with purposeful softness, a woman I didn't know stood at the threshold and held there, like a person considering entering a poem. I'm not here about a clock, she said when I met her with a mug. I'm here because my father didn't keep time well, and I don't know how to keep it without becoming him. We can practice, I said. We sat by my bench and breathed along with the regulator I'd finally persuaded back to virtue. We counted 3 ticks in, 6 out. We wrote a line on a postcard, I will not make time my enemy, and she took it home to tape inside a cupboard door. You don't have to love clocks, I told her as she left. You only have to let time be a thing that doesn't hurt when it doesn't have to. I wrote, practice plus breath, outcome, enemy demoted. And then a letter came from Eli with nothing on the paper but a drawing of the shop's door, and under it, in tiny script, wind one for me. I wound 2. I said his name aloud, and the shop did the small dip of approval it does when something lands where it belongs. Months later, we had a party that wasn't a party because I'm still me, and the room has opinions about fuss. The sign had weathered its first season and looked less like paint and more like a fact. We turned the good chair toward the door to welcome without words. People brought what they had, biscuits, stories, a clock whose hands had slipped, a pie that did not apologize for a crack in its crust. I read a page from the notebook aloud, not for applause, but to prove to myself that keeping a record is a way of being brave. When I said the keeper of time out loud, the room did not laugh. The bell on Mina's door across the lane answered us like a neighbor agreeing. Before everyone left, I did one last thing. I took a small square of paper from the drawer, a stationer's paper that smelled like wood shavings and intention. In my grandmother's tidy script, I can do it now, my hand learned it from memory and practice. I wrote, trust the quiet things, and underneath, because this is my chapter now, and share them. I folded it and tucked it into the back cavity of a clock that had sat too long on the 3rd shelf, waiting for its person. It wasn't thrift or romance. It was a way of reminding myself that the shop is a conversation that predates me and will likely outlast me, and my job is to keep the sentences kind. At closing, I did what I do now, lights off one by one, a hand on the bench, not for drama, but for balance. A glance at the sign through the glass. Still mine, still ours. I wound one clock on each shelf and said a name with it. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the soft tally the day left behind. Then I locked the door and walked home through a village that had learned my stride. At my bedside, my grandmother's clock waited like a cat who has decided you are worth its affection. I wound it 3 turns. I don't argue with rituals that keep me human, and lay down. The dark behaved, because it's learned that I will not make it prove itself. The tick settled my chest. Somewhere in another town, Eli probably breathed along with a clock whose name I don't know yet. Somewhere, a baker watched dough rise without a timer and forgave herself for the afternoons she'd needed the bell to tell her she'd done enough. Somewhere, a man wrote "Dear Ada" and didn't look for excuses in gears. Somewhere, a child flipped an hourglass and learned that even when sand leaks wrong, you can seal it and let it teach you anyway. Time did its old job, counting, and its other job, healing. In the morning, I would open the door beneath a sign that promised both. I would offer tea and a pencil and a silence that invites rather than accuses. I would put my hands where they belong and let them be slow. I would wind one for Eli. I would wind one for the stranger I hadn't met yet who needed a room where seconds are not a threat. I would leave the velvet bag where my reach could find it. I would remember not to confuse pressure with persuasion. I would choose a gentle word for the chalkboard and leave the rest to be written by the ones who came because they had heard, accurately, that time is better company when held softly. Before sleep, I turned the clock over and ran my thumb over the engraving as if reading Braille with my bones. EMR. My grandmother's initials, my inheritance, my instructions. I put the clock back, face up, as it prefers. "Good night," I said to the room, to the village, to the man who taught me to let a spring down without scaring it, to the girl who once thought quiet was a punishment and now knows it as a trust. Tick, fair, talk, enough. And under those old words, a new one that belongs to the keeper. Share. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night until next time.